Today, I'm going to share a story with you that will change how you approach most everything. Your career, your relationships, your dreams. But first, let me ask you something. When was the last time you just asked for exactly what you wanted? Not what you thought you could get, not what seemed reasonable, but exactly what you wanted. I'm talking about the big stuff, the promotion, the partnership, the opportunity. Most of us never do this. We hint around the edges, we drop subtle suggestions, we wait for somebody else to offer. But here's what I've learned from getting up close and personal with the most successful people on the planet. The difference between those who get what they want and those who don't often comes down to one simple thing. They ask. Let me tell you about a 12-year-old kid who understood this better than most adults ever will. This kid was part of something called the Explorers Club, a place where young computer geeks got together to build home-brewed electronics and computers. He was working on a project that hit a dead end. He needed one specific part, a component made by Hewlett Packard. Now, what would most people do? Well, they'd say, I can't go any further. Give up. Find a substitute. Ask a friend to ask a friend. Not this kid. He looked up the CEO of Hewlett Packard, Bill Hewlett, in the phone book and called him at home. Hello, Mr. Hewlett, he said. I need this part from my project. Bill Hewlett was running one of the world's largest and most successful tech companies at the time. He was a multi-millionaire and his schedule was packed, but he was amused by this bold 12-year-old. Okay, he said, I'll get you that part. Now, if you expected gratitude, you'd be surprised by what happened next. I'd also like a summer job, the kid said. And Bill Hewlett said, sure, to that too. That 12-year-old was Steve Jobs. But wait, the story gets better. Several years later, a man named Al Alcorn was sitting in his office at Atari, the first video game company, one of the coolest tech companies in the world at the time. His secretary burst in, we got a hippie kid in the lobby. He says he's not leaving until we hire him. Should we call the cops? Al said, I don't know. Let's see. Let him in. Steve Jobs walked into his office, looked him straight in the eyes, and said, I'd like the game designer job I saw advertised. Al gave him the job on the spot. A few years later after that, Steve was starting Apple. He realized that they needed a publicist. Not just any publicist, he wanted the best publicist in the world. That was Regis McKenna. The problem was, Regis was way too busy and expensive to work for a couple of nerds hanging out in a garage. So he said no. Steve called again. Regis said no again. Steve called again and again and again, every day for 2 weeks straight, until Regis finally said yes. By the way, Regis McKenna designed the famous Apple logo, hired their first CEO, got them their first funding. Apple as we know it would not exist without Regis McKenna. And Apple as we know it would not exist if Steve Jobs hadn't asked for exactly what he wanted for 2 weeks straight. Now, Steve Jobs had many characteristics, many of which are difficult to copy. He was charismatic and intelligent in a way few of us can match. But there is something he did that any of us can copy. He asked for exactly what he wanted. Not what he thought he could get, not what would be nice to have, but what he wanted. It seems simple enough. Anyone is free to ask for anything they want. And yet almost none of us ever actually do this. You can tell by the very fact that people were always taken aback when Steve did it. They were startled by the way he looked at them in the eyes and just asked. But it wasn't some superpower. And if it wasn't a great superpower because people told him no all the time. But he just kept asking. Now, let me be clear. Just because you ask does not mean you will get. Steve asked Nolan Bushnell, the Atari boss, for a $50,000 investment, offering him 33% of Apple in exchange. Much to Nolan's greatest regret, he said no. Steve asked Sony Music for an iTunes licensing deal. Even though Universal and Warner had already said yes, Sony told Steve no. Steve called the founders of Dropbox and offered them 9 figures to buy them out. The CEO, Drew Houston, told Steve no. But Steve's yeses? Well, they far outweigh his no's. Hey, look, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. If you ask, anything is possible. Here's what I want you to understand. Right now, there's something you want. Maybe it's a promotion, maybe it's a partnership, maybe it's a high-level recruit, maybe it's a big kahuna client, maybe it's funding for your idea, maybe it's a date with somebody extra special. You've been thinking about it, you've been hoping for it, you've been wanting and waiting for the right moment, but you haven't asked for it. Not directly, not clearly, not boldly. And while you're waiting, while you're hoping and praying, while you're planning the perfect approach, somebody else, someone with less experience, less talent, less to offer is walking up and asking for it and getting it. Because here's the reality. Most people are so shocked when somebody asks directly for what they want that they often say yes, just because of the sheer audacity. Steve Jobs himself said it best. He said, quote, "You have got to be willing to crash and burn with people on the phone, with starting a company, with whatever. If you're afraid of failing, you won't get very far." So here's your assignment. Think of one thing that you want, that you haven't asked for. Maybe it's at work, maybe it's in your business, maybe it's in your personal life. Write it down. Now, before the day is over, ask for it. Not hint at it, not suggest it might be nice. Ask for it. Look somebody in the eyes, or pick up the phone and say exactly what you want. Will they say yes? Maybe, maybe not. But here's what I guarantee. You'll be closer to getting it than you were just hoping. Because while everybody else is waiting for permission, for the perfect moment, for somebody else to offer, you'll be the one who simply asked. And that makes all the difference. Make some notes in your Darren Daily Journal and share your thoughts in the comments below.